Hi, everybody. Good morning, evening, afternoon, and welcome to the panel on what is a NIER paper in software engineering or what is not. So I'm Patricia Lago. I'm co-chair of the NIER track together with Gail Murphy, and we have the pleasure today to moderate this panel. So first, some logistics. Pose your questions in the chat. By now, you should know the drill. We will monitor all the questions from start to end. If you want to highlight them, you have this question mark. So push on that to highlight your questions and or like the others if you want them to become more visible. This panel is 45 minutes, so let's have a very good discussion in the community. Then let's move to the panel itself. So we have gathered this amazing panel here by design. So we have Antonia Bertolino. We know her as a research director at the Italian National Research Council in Italy. And she covered many different roles in ICSI and other conferences, including a former NIER co-chair and general chair, if I remember correctly, right?
Correct.
Then we have Paris Avgerio from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and he is also track co-chair of the New Ideas, a similar track in ESEC-FSC this year. Then we have Ivica Krinkovic from Chalmers University of Technology. And Ivica also covered many different roles in ICSI, including general chair. And I know he has very sharp ideas about what should a NIER paper be. And last but not least, we have Liliana Pasquale. She's assistant professor at the University College Dublin, and she will be having a very important role in ICSI also, because she is the next NIER co-chair in 2022. So everybody has a role in NIER, and we should have in a line maybe opinion about what makes a great or bad NIER paper to you. So I want to kickstart the discussion with a little bit of warm-up, which is we asked all of these guys to have one slide of statement. They have 3 minutes to pose their position about this question, and just feed your questions in the chat and be free to agree or disagree. So let's start with Antonia. What do you think?
Thank you, Patricia. So I talk fast. I have the privilege of saying something new, maybe, I don't know. So, okay, 3 minutes. What is bad NIER paper to me? To me, a bad NIER paper is some work that I find again in the main track of a main conference, maybe the same here, for instance, because the call for paper is a few months later. So, which means that you had this idea, and if you could just work maybe 3 months or 2 months more, you could then go to the main conference program. So to me, this is not something that qualifies a new idea. This is something about a preliminary work that you didn't have the time to work out satisfactorily to go to the main track already in ICSI. In this NIER label, N stays for new. New is the keyword. And in fact, novelty is important for all the tracks. So when you submit to the technical research track or even to the other track, you always look for novelty and originality. So it is not that you have to present in NIER something that is not yet published. To me, the terms new in this track means something more challenging, more visionary. So for me, when I see a NIER paper, already from the title, already from the abstract, I want to be surprised. I want to see, oh, look, really? They're saying this, something like this. So something that is not within some research trend. So if it is, again, a new technique in software regression testing, come on, we have hundreds of paper in this. I am looking for something that is not in a research thread well established, if possible, or something also that is challenging by putting together researchers from different disciplines. This is something that I love to see in NIER, that software engineering team with researchers from other disciplines to find some cross-disciplinary idea that is nice. And normally, I would not expect to find a lot of validation in a NIER paper. That is what, as a chair and as a reviewer, I have seen, and it is a bit strange. So for this, you can go to the main track, and for new preliminary work, you can go to the workshops. So I have put a timer. I am in 3 minutes.
You did very well.
I will stop.
I think it's a lot of food for thought. So that was actually also my question about validation. So you're saying not validated research, or validation is not a requirement. On the contrary, it shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Okay. Pass the ball to Paris.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. So my suggestion for NIER paper, if you want to do a good job here, is not to do salami slicing, if you know the notion. So salami slicing is when you have a bunch of research results and you just chop them up and publish every single increment as an individual paper. For NIER, you're supposed to do the exact opposite. So instead of publishing a very small increment, you should publish something big. Now, what does it mean to have something big to publish? I would argue that you can do this in 4 different ways. The first way is to disrupt. And by disrupting, I mean disrupting the status quo in your discipline. You know what exactly the state of the art is in your little field. So for the NIER track, you should be able to propose something radical, something completely new, something that will sort of change the way that we think and that we work in this specific field. If you're not able to disrupt, because disrupting is a bit difficult, maybe you're able to contradict the established notions and field beliefs in this field. So again, you know the state of the art. If you're able to say, well, so far we've been doing X, but maybe this is actually wrong because, you know, I have this idea or this preliminary evidence, and I found the exact opposite. So that's another very valid way of having a NIER paper. The third way is to imagine the future. So to imagine something, a research direction that is fundamentally new. Now, imagination is usually not the first thing that comes to mind when doing software engineering research. We focus a lot on, you know, rigorous data collection and analysis and complicated tools. Imagination is a little bit, let's say, out of our comfort zone. But using our imagination, or if you prefer your intuition, to come up with a new direction would make a good case. Remember to motivate your imagination or intuition. So it should not just be crazy talk. It should be a well thought and motivated scientific intuition. If finally you're not able to imagine the future, maybe you can reflect on the past. So this also has merit. Having a thoughtful observation about the past. Again, you know your little field within software engineering. Maybe it's 20, 30 years old. You know the path that the field has taken so far, and you're able to say, well, you know, we got these things right, but we also got these things wrong. And by looking at this history, we can actually say something about the future. So that would be the fourth and final way of writing a really great NIER paper, and that's where I would stop. Thank you.
I like the way you think. So radical. It comes to my mind two keywords that I believe we used this year and also previous years, which is visionary and groundbreaking. Do you think reviewers are ready for that?
I think reviewers should be educated for that. Reviewers are very much used to looking at what's the study design, did they do a good job in threats to validity? Have they presented all the data? They need to be educated. If you're reviewing for a NIER track, you need to learn to look at papers in a new way and to try to find these radical new ideas that are not yet supported by the perfect evidence or the perfect study design.
Okay, very good statement. I'm look forward to the audience, what they think about that. Let's pass the ball to Ivica. So what about you?
Yes, I started to look at what was the idea, how did it start with NIER, and what does it mean? And what I found that it started, I believe that's true, in 2009, so some years ago. And you can see here the text. It was a novel research ideas and promising work that has not yet been fully evaluated. And then the second, this emphasize the topics are the same as the main research track. So you can see maybe the idea was not exactly the same as it is today. And then in 2009, there was a message, there was amazingly lot submissions, but I couldn't find how many. But the next year, 2010, there was almost 200 contributions. And presentation was like, you have 10 minutes to present 20 slides. So it was like movie style, very fast. And then now, if you look today or for this year, then you can see slightly different requirements, early yet potentially groundbreaking research results, techniques and perspective that challenge the status quo in the discipline, looking forward ideas, thought-provoking reflections. So I think that we share this view today. And I think this NIER has evaluated, evolved from this being preliminary results, maybe workshop type, or not fully yet done, to something which is really new. And then when I'm looking at what would I like and what I like in the NIER papers and what I don't like, I really agree that already with title, and that's maybe even provocative. Can you just by title reject the paper? This NIER. I mean, it must be something different. So the idea, so you can see this NIER means new ideas and emerging result. If it come to new ideas, it really must be a new idea. And that means also that it should extend the standard questions of software engineering. So most probably, today, it should be interdisciplinary. It should be something which is important more than software engineering. Maybe not, but I think this is like a big argument, if something is very important. And when you come to the results, maybe that's a little bit more difficult questions, because maybe you don't need to show something which is already realized, but it's really what Paris mentioned, imagine. So you should imagine the results. So that's, I think, it should be something new. It should be something different, either in the results, and it should be different in the methods. So that would be like an ideal NIER paper for me. About the bad papers, there are the others which are not fulfilling these requirements.
All the rest.
All the rest. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then Liliana, what about you?
Okay, so I hope to say something interesting, considering I'm the last, or something new. But my reflection comes from the discussion I had with my co-chair for the NIER track we are organizing for XC22 with Christoph Treude, and from my personal experience. So I think that the key ingredient of a very good NIER paper are novelty, impact, and feasibility. And what does it mean, novelty? Novelty does not just mean that the paper is not incremental, but I think a good way to assess novelty is the fact that this paper can really lead to several publications authored by the same person or others. So can really lead to for example, a new field of research. The second aspect is impact. What does it mean, impact? So I think the idea should either open a new research topic or, as you are also saying, disrupting. So change the way some research is conducted in a specific domain. For example, change the point of view or the way in which certain type of papers are evaluated, for example. And also another way to assess impact is that the idea is so innovative, so disruptive that can also have a societal impact. Possibly one of the way to achieve this is that the contribution is multidisciplinary. And this is probably one of the aspects that was already highlighted by before. And finally, I think one aspect is feasibility. So from my experience, because I submitted a paper to NIER for the first time and it was rejected many years ago, and the reason was really feasibility. It's important still to provide some evidence that the idea is feasible. And what does that mean? It's possible to provide an example that show how the idea can be applied, or it's possible to provide evidence from previous work, because, for example, in previous work, the foundation on which the idea is based are based on consideration from previous work, or some initial empirical evidence that, for example, with a small set of data, that the idea can have potential. And I think this is important to convince the reviewer.
Mm-hmm. Do you really think that feasibility and novelty go hand in hand?
I think they do, because I think it's not so feasibility means that the idea should be so in the end this should open a new research agenda, right? So to open a new research agenda, there should be a very small evidence that the idea has potential, and so that's where feasibility jumps in. Yeah. Because in the end, if the idea is not feasible, it's not possible for the authors to produce the next paper that continue the idea. So that's what I think.
I like what you just said. So open a new research agenda. I think this is a very strong statement for a NIER paper. That's my personal opinion. Let's park that for a second. So we have our statement. So I think the audience should be warm. Let's look at the second question. So how can you convince a reader or a reviewer of all these things in 4 pages? So that suppose that you have a new idea, you really want to open a new research question, you want to inspire. How do you inspire the reviewer or the reader in these 4 pages? Who wants to take this?
Maybe I can start. So I'll tell you what you shouldn't do to convince a reader or reviewer in 4 pages. Now I've lost, sorry, my screen. So what you shouldn't do is try to squeeze in as much evidence/data as possible. This is not a full ICSI paper. Nobody expects to see, the full 9 yards in terms of the study design or the results and the data. A NIER paper should have some initial evidence. It's not necessary. So at least to my understanding, you can still have some well-argued positions in a NIER paper without supporting them with evidence. If you still want to have evidence, that's perfectly fine. It will make your case stronger, but you should not try to squeeze in too much of that. What you should try to do instead is use the narrative. So for me, simply, this means coming up with a good story. I cannot overestimate the importance of writing a paper that reads in a very nice flow and tells you a story from beginning to end in a simple and comprehensible way. We tend to complicate things, especially when it comes to NIER. You know, if you think about disrupting and coming up with a vision, then people get very philosophical and they start explaining to us the story of their lives, and, you know, coming up with some very obscure philosophical notions behind the idea of the paper. Do not do that. Use the narrative, say a good story, argue about your intuition, have some, you know, logical arguments why this is a good, novel, and, you know, plausible way to move forward, instead of just trying to throw as much data as possible. Oh, sorry, you know, this is not a full ICSI paper, but, you know, I'm still pushing as much data as I can to the reviewer to convince them that this is a good story. So narrative, not evidence.
So maybe we can give. Sorry, I have an echo. We can give the floor also to the audience. I switched to Gail because we can go back and forth, and I see also related questions popping up. What do you think?
Yeah, happy to be the voice of some of our audience members and keep the questions coming. We'll try to get in as many as we possibly can. So Adriana asked a question. What if someone has an innovative idea that does have some validation, but the data sample size is pretty small and it's not really reliable enough to be a result for the main conference track? Would that be the kind of paper that you would think is good for NIER? Who would like to jump in on that one? Evika?
Yes. So I think that's not important. Just as Paris said, you know, on the opposite, if you try to, in some way, convince by the evidence that that's true, that actually you lose a lot of space of showing what is novel and what is interesting. But I think that what Liliana says, that it must be feasible. So in some way, you have to show in the paper that it is feasible, it is realistic. I would say that if you have like a good short, but a good state-of-the-art description and what is in the context of that, but, you know, very short, but maybe very some famous authors or some practice, you know, shortly described, and then you show what is the difference and what is new. I don't think the evidence itself it's so important. On the opposite, this is like validation. If you try to validate what you have done too much, then probably it's not extremely new and novel.
Anyone else have any opinions? Paris?
Yeah, I agree with Ivica. In fact, I think having a weak ICSI paper is a terrible NIER paper. And this is because of all of the reasons we mentioned just before. So remember, we're talking about disrupting, about contradicting, about you know, taking a leap. Most of ICSI papers are, you know, very well designed studies, but they're very incremental. They give us some results that go just a little bit forward in advancing the state of the art. For a NIER paper, you don't want a small increment, you want a leap. So if you have an ICSI paper that, you know, doesn't have enough evidence, but still it's not a leap, you know, it's probably just a little increment, that's a terrible NIER paper. So do not do that. Go for the leap, go for disrupting and contradicting and, you know, going really forward.
Anyone else? Antonia, Liliana?
Yeah, just want to add something. It's true that I use the word evidence, but evidence, it doesn't have to be quantitative. Evidence could be a well-framed argument about novelty using previous work. Evidence could be, as I was saying, an example showing initial feasibility of the idea. And so, like, you know, it's not necessary to use quantitative evidence. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight is the research agenda, because the idea is that it's important to see how this idea can evolve. And what I've noticed in previous NIER papers is that the idea was not further developed. And so this is something that actually should not make a good and accepting NIER paper, because the purpose of a NIER paper is to have an idea that will develop further and will result in many publications. And so I think that's an important aspect too. That's why I'm stressing. I've stressed the word evidence, but yeah. So I just wanted to clarify this aspect.
Antonia, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, I want to add some different perspective, okay? So there are so many tracks, so many possibilities to publish your work within ICSI. There are the workshop, there are the student doctoral symposium. There are so many places. So NIER should not be used for like we said sometime in the past, class B paper of ICSI, right? Because it is really a wonderful window, a wonderful show of some new idea, and you should get this opportunity to expose the idea to the ICSI community and get the opportunity to have feedback on the idea. So it is not just to have yet another publication in your CV, in your list of publication that is even a short paper, and so is not even counted as a big new entry in your CV. So I think the use of NIER should be for this. And now, having said this, there is also a question of reviewing this paper. Being a NIER chair, as most of you have been, it's difficult because sometimes we have this nice paper, nicely written with the idea, with the validation, and the reviewer feels bad saying, no, this should be rejected. So in the end, what happens is that this short ICSI paper go through because there are, it is difficult, we are human, we cannot say, no, this is not NIER, no, because it's subjective in the end. So you don't feel like rejecting a paper because subjectively you think it is not NIER enough in a character. But then what happens is when I listen to NIER presentation, many times I am, as audience, I am dismayed because I say, this would be a NIER idea. To me, this is something old. I have heard this thing many times. So it's difficult because we human judge this, this paper, and maybe we should make a closed number of NIER paper that get accepted, and this would help people that review to say this yes and this no. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know, just provoking.
Well, lots of great perspectives, and there's quite a lively chat going on that I encourage everybody to look at. Sebastian poses the following question. You know, clearly the PhD students are the ones who maybe should be having more of the disruptive, creative ideas within our community. And sometimes they might be searching for that sort of first feedback on a paper. So maybe NIER is a good fit, but maybe it's not because they don't necessarily have the right background. So the question he poses is, who are the envisioned authors for a NIER paper? Is there a certain set of people that you think about when you think of the NIER authors?
I think, I mean, I think a PhD student, I guess it also depends on the stage they are, but I would say someone who is who knows the background and the previous work in a specific domain very well to identify new research direction. And, you know, that could be a PhD student who is investigating the literature, or could also be a more senior researcher.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Well, if you think of, for example, research funding, you have these personal grants. In Europe, we have the so-called ERC grants, which is a lot of money for you to, you know, work for the next 4 years on a really big thing. So people working on this kind of grants, a few million euros or dollars that in a few years is going to take you in a completely different place than what you are now. This is the right people that can write a NIER paper with this kind of idea, and also use this to get some feedback for their grant proposal. For PhD students, I think, especially starting PhD students, it might be a little bit too early for them to be able to come up with such ideas, but I would not exclude it, because PhD students do have imagination. If you ask a lot of old professors, maybe we don't have the imagination that we used to, but a young PhD student might have exactly the right kind of imagination for such a NIER paper.
Anyone else?
I would like to ask actually a question, about the ideas. Are we for like great ideas in very, very defined area, like great ideas about nothing, or like idea about everything? So is it more interest like a new test method, which like it's much, much better, but we did testing like in hundreds of years, or is it something interesting which is coming from completely new area, which is maybe not that's coming more and more in software engineering, but you have seen from biology, from social sciences, and such other things. So which idea is better? I think I'm asking that.
Anyone on the panel want to take that one on?
No takers? Ivica, for sure, the second perspective to me looks much more intriguing, much more challenging. If we come out drawing idea from other field and trying, then a new test method, if you ask to me, I don't know, but yeah, could even be.
I hope there's room for both.
Yeah,
I hope there's room for both.
Yeah, I just want to ask that sometimes some disruptive idea comes from reflection of previous work. Because, for example, previous work has looked at something in the same way, and there is, for example, different perspective to look at the same idea. So yeah, I guess it depends.
So Ashkan asked a question that I often hear come up about NIER, which is, if you take your really novel idea and you publish it in NIER, is that going to actually prevent you from actually publishing it in other top venues as you develop the work? So does anyone want to take that one on?
It should be the opposite, ideally. So if you're the first one to express this idea, you might even get cited a lot for coming up with this trailblazing new idea. But that certainly does not prevent you from working it out and being able to present some really solid results. If you do that a couple of months later after your NIER paper, there's something fishy. But yeah, sometimes you see people publishing a couple of years later the results that came out from that NIER idea, and those eventually have the maturity and the evidence to support them, and those are also very successful and well cited. I think if you're able to find a good idea, you might even become the leader in a specific area, and people will cite you and will follow you and will also try to work in the same field. So there's a lot to gain by writing a good NIER paper.
And Ivan asked a question about the tension around evidence. So statements like, and he quotes, "A NIER paper is stronger with more evidence," I think that might have been yours, Liliana, "indicate that accepted papers will have the most evidence, and often they do. Yet when you're only talking about a 4-page paper where evidence is not required, these papers should take some sort of a leap." How can you square away, how can you reconcile the need for evidence and the need to take a leap?
Well, there is no secret, no answer there. So in a sense that, I mean, there is no recipe to address this problem. So as I was saying, like I think some preliminary what I would say preliminary evidence in the form of an example, in the form of a well-thought argument. I think that should be sufficient. But again, as Paris was saying, having the reviewer also to be on board is another aspect of the issue. And probably one thing to do that is to craft the evaluation criteria in a way that the highest priority and weight is given to the novelty. And that's a possible way to address this issue.
Antonia.
Yes, I want to say something about this. I don't fully agree on this thing about evidence. So Paris before mentioned the ERC grant. I have sat in the panel of ERC in the past, and the criterion that is followed to select the project is that they should be high risk, high gain. And there have been proposals that were nice, well worked out, and so on, that have been rejected because the committee said, this is not high risk, high gain. This is something that is in the trend. This author should have submitted to the other track of the European program. I think we should have this courage with the NIER. As I said, it should be an opportunity for something that is groundbreaking, provoking, disrupting. But again, it's difficult then to reject the other paper. So I don't know. But this high risk, high gain, to me, qualify that the idea should be worth pursuing, even accepting the risk that after some time the idea is lost. So maybe about 100 NIER paper make 20 nice research track and 80 are left. I don't know. So, but
just I want to add something on that. One other criteria in the ERC, especially in the initial part, is feasibility. And so,
yes. Okay.
And so, I mean, if you don't provide an initial argument that the idea can work, then your proposal can end up being rejected as well.
It's true. It's true.
I think the parallel between ERC and NIER has gone too far, maybe.
Yes.
What I would add to what Antonia was mentioning, because I agree with Antonia, it's really not about the evidence. Let's not put too much emphasis on the evidence. For me, it's way more about the story. I think as a community, we've learned how to write, very good technical papers that explain the technical details in great detail, and we are very focused on that. But we don't always pay attention to the story. The story should be good. It should really be clear, concise. It should have the right message. It should make the reviewers understand that this is disruptive and it actually makes sense. We should follow this without looking at initial evidence that this convinces me from the story that it's a good path to go. So if you have any way to improve your storytelling abilities, like follow a workshop or anything, I would advise you to do that. Writing a good story is easier said than done, and we can get trained on improving our storytelling.
Ed has a really interesting item in the chat that I really want to make sure the panel gets a chance to comment on, and we're in final minutes here. Ed says, does NIER have any way of actually looking back and seeing which of the accepted papers succeeded and which of the failed papers or rejected papers actually did succeed? This is a place where we're so good in academia about talking about the successful papers, but we're not really that visible about the things that were rejected many times. What does the panel think about that? Should we be changing NIER to actually celebrate maybe the rejected papers that ended up being game changers for the field?
Yeah. That would be a nice piece of work, a systematic review of NIER success and failures.
That sounds like a really great NIER paper, actually.
No, that is not a NIER paper. That is a ICSI paper, I think. Journal paper, maybe. Yeah.
If someone has a graduate student that they can put to look into past NIER papers and see which ones succeeded and which ones did not, that would be a great project.
As Ed comments, what would be equally interesting is maybe knowing which NIER submissions never got published and actually became successes in different ways. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Patricia to allow the panel to have some final comments.
Yeah, I was thinking as a final comment to use a motto. There is the way of saying less is more. So if you think that in 4 pages, indeed, you should convey this inspiration, what would be your suggestion in 1 sentence to the future submitter authors of the NIER track?
You mean the structure of the paper? Which are the sections?
No, I mean, what should they focus on? Like, focus on inspiring the reader, focus on totally different perspectives. What would be the first thing one should think of?
Can I say, so if I would look for and review, like for a successful NIER paper, the first would be like originality, novelty, and like real novelty, idea. So the first thing is idea. The second is convincing. It must be convincing. So not necessary evidence. Maybe evidence could be different things, but it should be a new, completely new idea, and it should be convincing. These 2 things are important.
Okay. Liliana.
One thing I think could be nice to have is to highlight the main principle the idea is based on. Like, for example, I talk for personal experience. Maybe my paper will be rejected. So, but I think one important thing is to highlight the key principle the idea is based on, and this is very important to intrigue and excite the audience. And then provide the details, but providing some insight about the main principle the idea is based on could be very important to intrigue and attract the interest of the reviewers.
This is a great, I think, suggestion to totally disrupt the structure of a paper, which I like. Paris, Antonia, what about you?
I am reading in the chat, there is a comment from Bashar that says, can I read? If the reviewer says, wow, after reading it, then it should be accepted. Yes, Bashar, absolutely. Yes.
Paris?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to focus on the story. So the NIER paper should not be a purely technical paper that has every single detail correct, as you would expect from an ICSI paper. It should be a good story, a good narrative. That's where the focus is, and that's what we, as chairs, previous, former, future chairs of NIER tracks, should educate the reviewers to look at.
So, and Antonia, last words.
Me, last words. Well, I think I hope we have invited people to be more courageous. What would you say? To challenge the reviewer, to trust that they can go through with some new disrupting idea. Probably this will be mixed with other short technical paper that is somehow unavailable. But yes, I hope to see more that we say, wow, during the presentation. I would have liked to have this idea, or I want to try this idea, something like this.
Excellent. Guys, thank you very much for all the insights. I think, well, I was inspired actually. So I was thinking, okay, I have to submit absolutely a new NIER paper next edition. I hope also the audience got invitation. Gail, you want to say something as well?
Thanks the audience for being. There's really great questions coming in.
Yes. Really, I was thinking, okay, how we can capture all the comments on the chat. So I think, Liliana, you have some work for next year, and Bob for instructing the reviewers as well. So see you.
We have already